It's nefarious, man. Like, the brain works in fucked up ways.
The mind is one of the most deceiving, manipulative pieces of equipment, flesh, human bodies on earth. I never have trusted my brain.
All of that weight lives in your head, and you are the decision maker.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Hi, it's Kaylee. I'm one of the producers behind the Psychology of Entrepreneurship, and for any new listeners, this is a weekly series where we go inside the mind of an entrepreneur, artist, athlete, academic to decipher what is the psychology of our decisions. For the past 2 weeks, we've revisited volumes 1 and 2 of this series, tying in parts of newer volumes to try and understand the common thought patterns and behaviours between entrepreneurs. Last week, we heard from Dr. Sherry Walling about the impact of imposter syndrome, something that affects most of us. Today, we're going to be doing the same thing, revisiting Ronsley's conversation with serial entrepreneur and speaker Alda Karen from volume 3. Alda has been smashing entrepreneur goals her whole life, receiving her first sponsorship when she was just 13. In this conversation, Alda goes deep on her relationship with her brain and how she learned to recognize and avoid unhealthy thought patterns. I'm going to be chiming in throughout the volume to pull in relevant parts from other conversations to see how everything adds up. So let's jump right into it.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Hey, it's Ronsley. Last week, Sherry, or more formally, Dr. Sherry Walling, tangled my mind with...
I think maybe the question that we don't ask is like, how's this going to play on the deathbed? That's the question to ask. What are we going to regret? What are we going to be sad that we missed when our time is up?
Even asking myself the question, what am I going to regret, makes me uncomfortable to the point that this happens in my brain and in no particular order. I ask the question, my brain makes up this really weird scenario. What if I couldn't tell someone I loved them before they passed? Or what if I scale my business and it publicly fails? I make myself feel better by saying, how about you scale your business first and then worry about whether it publicly fails? What if I have kids and I pass on my eccentric behavior to the next generation? No, too hard. What's happening on Facebook? Let me check the BBC Sports page. Regret? I've lived. I won't regret. Who are you kidding, Ronsley? Don't be cocky. What are you doing? What are you ignoring? Yeah, that's an insight into a version of my psychosis. I say this nonchalantly, of course. Regret made me focus on time as the biggest variable here. Regret is just something done or not done on a timeline. And what age and how old you are plays a part in that perception, right? Well, my next guest was a VP for a design company that made the movie Interstellar at the ripe old age of 19. That's right. This is Alda Karen. Alda is cool.
So that's why, like, my mental health regarding, like, how I remember, like, or like the arguments, like I said, like finding like good arguments to like justify that you should tell that man to hire you, or you should apply for that job, or you should like rent an arena and have a lecture or host an event, or you should like follow your dreams, basically, is I write a list about everything that I think makes me cool. And it's from the very small things, right? When I bought my first pair of like Adidas sneakers, like that made me feel so cool, and walking into school with them was so cool, right? And then like getting that job at 19. Like, so I write all these lists, like from the smallest things to the biggest things. And like, first it's hard to start writing, but then as I go, like I've written like 4 pages or something, I feel so powerful. I feel like there's nothing I can't do. Sometimes it takes me like just 1 minute. I just fire down some stuff. I read it over and I'm like, Alda, you got this. And then I go into the day. Sometimes it takes me a little bit longer. And it's the same stuff that I say about emotions and feelings, right? No feeling is forever. It comes and goes. So I know that the feeling that I have in the morning is going to go away at some time during the day. The list helps with that. So sometimes it just takes 2 or 3 things that I list down and the feeling's gone and I feel more confident and more powerful and I can like kind of tackle the day. Sometimes I need 15 to 20 things and then I feel a little bit more confident and then I'm like, okay, this confidence will come more throughout the day. So it's just kind of knowing, you know, all these arguments, it's just knowing these kind of, I hate saying facts, but it is facts, like these facts about yourself. Like, you know, this emotion will come and go, right? So don't let this emotion control you in this moment right now. And then, you know, this feeling of feeling small and insecure and not confident at all, you know, this feeling will go away too, right?
Our brains can be our worst enemies, but having positive resources to help us when we're down could be a key to getting ourselves out of those states faster. We're going to time travel for a second here and pull in a clip from next week's volume with Travinia Barber, where she talks about how she learnt to value affirmations in times of self-doubt.
I never thought I was a words of affirmation person. I never really would have said that, you know, somebody giving me accolades mattered. And now I have a folder on my computer that's literally called for when I feel like shit. And I screenshot things that people say to me or about me. And I frequently will go to that now to remind myself of who I am when I start to let doubt creep in and think that maybe I'm not good enough, or I'm not skinny enough, or I'm not successful enough. I remind myself I've already done, you know, the things that I said I wanted to do, and I've already made the impact that I said I wanted to make. I just forget really fast.
So when I feel like it's like staying for a little bit longer, I use these life keys that I call life keys, which are just like, a life key is, it can be a sentence, it can be like a quote, it can be some kind of practice, anything. Like, I just named it life keys because I named it that in my journal, and it just helped me kind of, you know, have more good days, and then kind of doing stuff that I never imagined that I could do. Just little helpers, kind of.
If you'd like to check out Alda's life keys, following her on Instagram is a great idea. I love her stories. Wait, did she just say make a list of what makes me cool? About 6 years ago, I did an entrepreneurial incubator program that asked me, as part of an exercise, to write myself a bio. Damn, that was so hard. And it was so hard even when I wrote my book and I became a published author. I asked Andrew Griffiths to write my About the Author section. It's just so hard to write about myself. So, I do not have a list of what made me cool for sure. But just starting to think about that made me feel a bit different. And then Alda started to tell me when she almost died in an airplane crash.
I'm going to tell you about the story, the moment where my relationship with my brain changed. Yes. I was on an airplane flying from New York to Iceland. This is probably a couple of years ago. And there's this crazy turbulence, right? And it's one of those airplanes, right, where the whole airplane is just shaking, like all the young children are crying, like people are screaming, the oxygen max come down, everyone was freaking out, And I remember I just like clenched my arms into my seat, and I like told myself over and over again in my head, if this plane lands, I will never ever step foot on a plane again. And you had these moments where like, shit, I'm going to die in a plane crash. This is how I'll die. And you have, like, your mind goes everywhere. And you start thinking about your life. You start thinking about all this kind of stuff. But the one thing I kept repeating was, I will never get on an airplane again. And then what happens? I land in Iceland. It's fine. Everyone's good. And like, some people needed some consulting after it, but like, otherwise we were fine. And I do my lectures in Iceland, and then I have to fly back to New York, back home. And when I'm standing in the line to the gate, I get an anxiety attack. And I'm not a big anxious person. I have not dealt with anxiety a lot. I just kind of knew what it was because I have close friends that have dealt with it their whole lives. So I knew like the symptoms, like my knees gave in, my chest felt like it was like 1,000 pounds, and I could not catch my breath. So like, as much as I tried breathing, I just couldn't catch my breath. And so I knew it was an anxiety attack, but what I didn't know was like, why was it coming there? Like in the middle of an airport, I'm just waiting to get on a line to go like into the airplane to fly back home. Like this is so weird. Like why didn't this happen like before a lecture or whatever? And I kind of like blurred out like in front of everyone. Like I asked myself, like, what the hell are we doing right now? People were like staring at me. What the fuck's wrong with this woman? But I hadn't even finished the sentence where the image of the flight to Iceland like popped into my mind, right? Like that image. And that's when I realized like, wow, my brain thinks this flight back home is going to be the same as it was to Iceland. And this is where the relationship with my brain changed, right? Now I look at my mind as I look at myself, like I am in my mind. I have thoughts and feelings in my mind. And then my brain has thoughts and feelings in my mind, right? But sometimes the brain gets just a little too simple for life.
Taking time to recognize your feelings and understanding why they're there can seem daunting, but it's advice that we're constantly told to truly be satisfied with where we're at. In Volume 16, Darren O'Lean told us of his experience with sitting in his feelings after his house burnt down in the 2018 California wildfires.
There's something that we do when we're uncomfortable as people, I think, and we avoid emotional pain. We don't want to be vulnerable. So we run around pretending everything's good. And one of my instructors in my master's in psychology program called it spiritual bypass. We just want to jump over all the uncomfortable and get to like, it's all good. We're all one. We're all connected. Fuck you. I've got fucking pain here. And when I say turn into it, just say yes to all of it. Let it happen. And you don't have control over what that grief is. Turning into that is fucking powerful and painful, but I'd rather deal with it and allow it than shove it down somewhere in my soul and being and body and have it manifest in pain, anger, resentment.
So I heard this from a psychologist called Marissa Peer. She said the brain's main goal is to drive you from pain to happiness, right? And the brain, he can hear and see everything you can hear and see. Whatever, if it's daydreaming or if it's just you're watching a movie, he can hear and see it too, right? He hears every sound you're listening to, or just he experiences everything that you experience. But he also shares your mind with you. So whenever some thoughts and feelings come into your mind that kind of don't fit, and you're just like, why am I feeling like this now? Why am I thinking this right now? 99% of the time, it's not you, it's your brain. It's your brain being too simple for your complicated life, right? I knew that this plane ride back to New York wouldn't be the same. Like this was one of a kind trip that I experienced to Iceland.
And what occurred for me was I moved through that pretty fast because I did just say, okay, let me feel all of it without putting a judgment on it. Let me feel it. And then through that, I'd have these moments, these sparks of absolute fucking amazing clarity. It was like a shooting star would shoot by my grief and I'd be like, oh fuck, what was that? And all of a sudden I just have more and more and more of those shooting stars through my grief. And I'm like, I'm starting to have visions now. I'm starting to see my property. I'm starting to feel what it's like as a result of this. I'm starting to understand what I'm going to do on the property. What is the opportunity that is presenting itself as a result of completely going through this grief? It was a little weird. I'd have these moments, these sparks of absolute fucking amazing clarity. It was like I'm starting to have visions now.
In their research into women and imposter syndrome, Pauline Rose Clarence and Suzanne Imes found that the majority of women face imposter syndrome because they feel unintelligent, even though their achievements say otherwise.
This was such an interesting story, right? And what was more interesting is how Alda breaks it down. This reminds me about the last volume and Sherry saying,
So the way to deal with imposter syndrome is to sort of realize it's not fucking about you in that moment. Like, it isn't.
So is that the best way to quieten the imposter? Understanding that my mind makes up thoughts just like my heart pumps blood and my liver tries to be the important filtration unit that it's meant to be? And do you know what the brain has in common with the hot guy in all the romantic comedies?
So now I feel like I have this relationship with my brain. You know, in all romantic comedy movies, there's always like this one dude who's like this forever single dude, but he always is the first one with all the relationship advice. Like we see this in all romantic comedies, right? Like there's always this one dude who's single as fuck, and you really hope he won't die alone because he's so funny, but he's always the first one with advice. So that's how I look at my brain right now. My brain has never been in a relationship, but he's always the first with all the relationship advice. So everything that goes on in my mind, I just take with a grain of salt.
Fascinating, right? I remember one of the things I've done in my life that I chalk out to, that was a great experience, Ronsley, was getting married in the Catholic Church. As part of that experience, Rochelle, my wife, and I had to go through 2 full days of marriage coaching, where a bunch of priests gave us marital advice on sex and marriage. There were over 70 couples in this room, and most of them were taking notes. The point I'm trying to make is that what else am I taking for granted as truth? I'm making air quote symbols here, like you can see me.
Like my concept with time and my whole problem with time, and I don't believe in time. It helps us for the structure, but it doesn't help us personally. It's socially acceptable for you to be worried about time. It's a man-made concept, and I do believe in these old souls. You had a prior life, etc. I do believe in that, but that's like as spiritual as I get. I'm more of like a logic-based person. But I feel when it comes to time, and when it comes to feeling like I wish I was younger or I wish I was older, I mean, I pretended to be 5 years older than I was when I was 19. Like I did that for a long time just because people wouldn't believe I was 19. So I was like, yeah, you're right, I'm 25. Like when I was 19. Yeah, I felt really imposterous. But it was socially acceptable for me to say that because it made people understand me better. Now I can stop saying that because I'm finally 25. But like, you know, before that, it was really hard for people to understand how far I've come based on the little technical time that we call time I'd been on Earth, right? It's great for structures, right? It's great for planning appointments, and it's great for like knowing when you have been working too much, when you've been working too little. It's fine for that. But when it comes to personal growth and like for you to claim all your dreams and successes, you should never look at time. There are no right timings. It's just your timing. And I always take this example about the US presidents, like Barack Obama. He retired. He retired when he was 55, and Donald Trump started when he was 70. I know a 104-year-old heart surgeon, you know? I know an 80-year-old woman who's now, right now this second, walking the Jacobs Road in Spain, which is like, I don't know how many thousands of miles, right? Like I have this new life motto that everyone can teach me something, right? Anyone I meet can teach me something. And when you have that kind of vision on life, and that drives me, that like I am enough, time just comes this tool that we use. It's like time doesn't control you, you control time. But it's a socially acceptable excuse, and a socially acceptable worry. So it's easier for you to justify it in your head.
In the Philip McKinnon episode, I spoke about how being busy is likened to being successful, and how I struggle with guilt when I'm not being busy. But if and when you listen to the whole interview with Alda, you can tell that this concept of time just made me question a lot, and it kind of threw me off a little bit, because everything I thought about reminded me about how I had not much time left. From the ads trying to sell me anti-aging cream to the constant reminder that my body doesn't recover like it used to when I was younger. And even having conversations about how old I'll be when my kids are 18 if I had kids right now. All these things just made me think of how little time I had left. Where did all these standards of how things should be come from? And if we are to challenge these standards, which by most people standards are considered as normal, I'm sure the imposter comes to that party.
Yeah, you landed on imposter there. Like, you will never feel more like an imposter when you're doing something that comes naturally to you. And that's something that I need to remind myself of every day. Like, when I most feel like I'm a traitor, that's when I know I'm doing something that comes naturally to me. Because when we do something that comes naturally to us, we don't feel like it's hard work. So hence, we feel like an imposter. We feel like a traitor. We feel like whatever. So, yeah, with imposter syndrome, it's a real thing, and it's always the loudest voice when we're doing something that comes naturally to us and that we're passionate about.
Here's Rich Litvin from Volume 20, describing why feeling like a fraud is how you know you're in the right situation as a high performer.
A paradox is a situation where it's true in one situation and not in another, and both are true at the same time. And so it's almost like it doesn't make sense. So the fraudulence paradox for me is the fact that as a high performer, your mission is actually to always feel like a fraud. The moment you don't feel like a fraud, you're in a community, you're in a place where everyone's in awe of you, and you're not in awe of anybody else. It's not the place where you're really going to thrive. I call it the zone of genius. So the problem with your zone of genius is that thing you do so naturally and so effortlessly and so easily. Right? You're smiling, right? Because it comes to you so easily. You dismiss it. Doesn't everybody do this? I was just coaching a woman just before you arrived who's responsible for over $140 million of sales. And it's nothing to her, it's just what she does. So she doesn't see it as anything significant. I had to literally show her, no, this is really significant. When people hear this, they're going to be really impressed and interested to know more about you. But we don't see that because it's what we do.
At Amplify, we focus on helping our clients build a show around what comes naturally to them. It is really interesting how much we fade into the background, our strengths, and what comes naturally to us, and focus on what is working for other people. There is this paradox, right? What if I can learn a quick trick and a handy tip from someone who has done it before? If that person is making millions of dollars by having a show that goes out every single day with the exact same questions, then I must do the same and I will get the exact same results. Wouldn't I?
If you missed the Philip McKinnon volume where he said...
By the way, just one quick little question. Why? Why do you want to be Steve Jobs? What would it be like to be fucking you?
So if the idea is to be ourselves, and every time we are ourselves, we feel like we are the imposter because it comes so naturally to us, right? But what about someone who's 19 and whose first language isn't English?
I mean, how I experience imposter syndrome, it feels like, for example, when I'm talking and I feel like I haven't researched enough, I haven't done enough work, I feel like someone would be better qualified to do this, someone older, for example. I experience imposter syndrome when I'm sometimes writing an email. I don't feel like I can phrase some wording right because English is my second language, and this is how imposter syndrome comes to me. And what I do when I feel this, because imposter syndrome is just you feel like a traitor, you feel like you don't belong, you feel like you haven't done enough work, etc. I always remind myself of that. I am enough. And the more worried I get, the more I know I'm getting closer to something that I actually want to do. And, it's the same, it's all connected, right? The more anxious I get, the more passionate I know I am. The more fear I get, the more imposter syndrome I get, the more I know that I'm doing the right thing. It's all these signals and feelings that we were taught were bad that I kind of learned that are helping me guide me a little bit. We always categorize bad feelings as something that we should avoid, right? But rather than avoiding them, I kind of turn defense into offense. So that's kind of how I view imposter syndrome. I make it kind of work for me. So whenever I feel it most, I don't get it a lot in my talks because that's when I'm talking, when I'm doing a keynote speaking event or whatever, I feel most myself. But I've gotten it once or twice, and that was when I kind of had to stop the lecture for a little bit and have a drink of water and be like, Alda, you are enough. It doesn't matter if this lecture will suck. It doesn't matter if it's great. You are enough, because you are enough means that you're not comparing yourself. So when you feel weak, when you feel like you are sick or you feel like you don't have money, whatever weak means for you right now, like you don't say, oh, there are people in third world countries that are having it worse than me. Like, no. And when you feel really glad and when you feel like, oh, I'm getting this great opportunity, then you think, oh no, someone else should get this opportunity because someone else is better qualified. So it goes both ways. It's both equally as bad. But that's when you need to remind yourself, I am enough.
When we come back, what if there was a way where you could trick the brain to believing anything you wanted it to, including the idea that you're enough?
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
The main objective of this audio project is to bring together entrepreneurs and creatives who share similar values so that they can find the courage to put out their authentic voice for the right people to hear, which allows for them to make their impact on the world. Every great movement started with a memorable speech. For access to full-length interviews, go to psychologyofentrepreneurship.com and click the button.
Before the break, we were talking about what the different ways we could potentially experience imposter syndrome were, especially if you come from another country and English isn't the language you think in. Based on all the insightful things Alda was sharing, I wanted to know who she saw as an entrepreneur. What does that person look like?
I define an entrepreneur as a person who stumbled upon a problem or stumbled upon a gap in a market somewhere, and he decided to take it upon himself to fix it and bring something new, innovate, challenge the status quo. I look at an entrepreneur as a person who's not afraid of going outside the social acceptable setup and bring something new to the table. And that's why I love all this entrepreneurship now in the mental health industry, because people are like, you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings. And I'm like, yes, there we go. Like 99% of the time, it's your brain. So it's a whole thing of like entrepreneurs now in the mental health industry that are like revolutionizing this like so old idea that we are everything that's happening inside of us. Like we're not at all.
Did you know 8 out of 10 of all businesses fail within the first 18 months?
What if we could notice the thoughts going around in our minds? What if we could not let them take us on an emotional roller coaster? But even better, what if we could make the mind to believe that we are smarter, like Albert Einstein smart? Does that actually make us smarter? So I asked Alda, and she told me about Hannah.
Me and my friend Hannah, we met last year here in New York. We're connected by mutual friends. And I told her about what I've been doing in mental health and all the kind of new approaches and directions that mental health is taking. And she told me about these new studies that have been that colleges have been doing with VR. So there's this one college at the University of Barcelona which did this study where students saw themselves as Albert Einstein and then went on to take a test. And then other students in the VR saw themselves as just like some average Joe and took a test. And the students that saw themselves as Einstein in the VR glasses, they performed over 60% better than the other students. And their IQ was higher after the experience. And I was like mind blown. I was like, wait, what? VR can make you smarter? And that's what I love about the mind, right? Because this is all the proof the brain needs. The brain doesn't realize the difference between virtual reality and actual reality. So when the brain looks in the mirror through a virtual lens and sees himself as Albert Einstein, a human that he knows is like one of the smartest humans in the world, like of course he's gonna think he's smarter when he goes and takes a test. So she was talking about all these researches that they've been doing, and we were both like mind blown. And I said, what more can we do? What more, like how can we upgrade our mental health with virtual reality? So that's when we kind of started talking and we started setting up all these experiences. And I found a company called Beyond VR who had like an experience with public speaking. So I started like coming into companies with VR virtual glasses, and everyone who was afraid of public speaking, I would have them speak in front of like 10 people room, and then like a 50 people room, and then like a 500 people arena, and then like 1,000 people arena. It's like I set up shop in like one of the offices, and then I just take one-on-one in, and then I have them experience, like try out their speeds in front of whatever audience they want. And we have like stuff with afraid of heights, and like a lot of just imagine if you could prepare for anything that life throws at you at the comfortable of your own home. Like imagine facing your fears, sitting on the couch on your home and being safe the whole time. Like we have spiders, we have like, you know, all kinds of stuff. So because I feel it's the same thing about fear with everything else. You just need to practice feeling comfortable in an uncomfortable position or situation. So if I keep throwing you in front of 1,000 people and ask you to talk on the spot, when you actually have to do it, the brain is not going to be like working against you anymore. Because that's your brain is your forever roommate, right? Yeah. You share your mind with your brain. Yeah. So you need to like practice makes perfect, like for the brain. So you need to have the brain experience it again and again and again, so it starts working more for you than against you. So that's how I use virtual reality to kind of like upgrade your mind game by having you practice it again and again and again.
So in 2018, a very close friend of mine, Mike, took me for a virtual reality gaming experience here in Brisbane. It was like nothing I'd experienced before. We were in this large industrial warehouse in an open space. We were both given this big jacket which had a whole bunch of sensors on it and an attached virtual gun. They also gave us virtual goggles and noise-cancelling headphones. So they load up this game and everything feels real. Do you know how I knew that? I did not want to cross a virtual tightrope in the game, even though I knew I would never fall anywhere, because I was in an open warehouse. I just refused to cross the line. I just refused for the longest time, and Mike just stood there shaking his head. It was kind of embarrassing. Because worst of all, I've climbed much, much higher stuff in the open wilderness with nothing but a harness, rope, and some chalk. So standing in this open warehouse, pretending not to cross a line was really weird. I wonder how much of this can be of use in real life. Does virtual reality have a place in dealing with our internal made-up fears?
Some thoughts that I would think would get me in a bad mood. And that's when I realized my thoughts have power. So whenever I would think about some embarrassing moment that happened to me when I was 14, I would immediately be in a bad mood. And I was like, whoa, my thoughts have a lot of power over me right now. And just by asking that question, like, wow, does that thought put me in a bad mood? Just asking that right question. And I'm like, yeah, maybe. Then I became more aware of like how I use my thoughts and like what and where they come from, right? If they come from the brain, if they come from me. And I just believe, I do believe in law of attraction, like the whole secret thing. I believe that. And I once read that a human has 60,000 thoughts a day. There's no way in hell you can control every thought and control how you respond to every thought. Like you can't. It's 60,000 thoughts. But then I read a positive thought has over 10,000 more power. It's over 10,000 more powerful than a negative thought. So then I just put two and two together, right? Okay, so for every day, every morning, I need 6 positive thoughts about some one thing or one event that I want to attract into my life. And I kind of proved that to myself when I rented out my first arena. It was for 2,000 people. So put yourself in my shoes, right? You're a 23-year-old woman. You've had one lecture before in your life. You just rented a 2,000 people arena. You have 3 months to sell it out. Otherwise, you'll be in debt for at least 10 years because it costs millions to rent it. Spiritually and attracting stuff to you, like where would you start? That's when I started using the 6 positive thoughts. So how I did it is 3 months before the lecture, I wrote on a piece of paper on a Post-it note next to my bed in my room. I wrote, number 1, the status that I'm writing on Facebook to announce that it's sold out. Number 2, people sitting in a sold out arena. Number 3, me calling my mom to tell her it's sold out. Number 4, me posting a picture of an empty auditorium and saying this will be full in a few hours. Number 5, like me driving to the stadium thinking, wow, this stadium and arena is sold out just for me talking for 3 hours. That's insane. And then number 6, me posting a picture of like a full arena saying, thank you, I can't believe it's sold out. Thank you for coming, etc. These 6 points I wrote down on a Post-it note. And before I got out of bed, because I love doing stuff before I get out of bed, is I thought and I visualized and I thought about each thing, these 6 positive outcomes that all were connected by my arena, my first ever like big lecture being sold out. And what happened? It sold out.
In volume 18, UJ Ramdas explained what he does to get the best outcome out of his day.
You feel like fucking Superman when you walk out for like a 5-minute situation. That's great. That is a result you want. That's a result I want. So that helps a lot. And then I just kind of like look at my day plan and see what the situation is, like what needs to happen, like how just kind of work out the flow of my day. I know enough about myself where I know to not chunk too many things too close together. So typically I'll have like 2 or 3 chunks within the day that helps me get to where I want to go ish. What would make today great? Yeah. So that's part of the question is like, and so in a certain sense, the best way to do that question is you transport yourself to the end of the day, and at least that's how I do it. I just feel great. Just imagine I feel great at the end of the day, like just feel fantastic. Okay, well, what needs to happen for that result to happen? That's the way. That's one of my favorite questions. What needs to happen for that to happen? And then I just list out the things that are in my head. I'm like, okay, that needs to happen for that to happen. It doesn't happen all the time, but when I look at the journal after the day's done, I'll check the things that happened, and I cross the ones that didn't. And I'm telling you, like, the days I'm feeling that feeling is the days when those things have been checked. And I've been doing this for almost like 10 plus years now, because I was doing the Farmer Journal before we created it. So there's a very strong feedback loop of like, I know how I do this.
So since we've had this chat, Alda has gone out and rented a 5,000 person arena and sold that out too. The picture of her addressing this arena is such an amazing one. And I would suggest you check it out on the front page of her website. So, post-it note next to my bed with 6 positive thoughts, right?
And of course, I'm not saying that you can just sit in your bed and think stuff. Like, we have a saying in Icelandic that goes, the mind will bring you halfway, the world will carry you the rest. And I love that sentence because it brings the spiritual and the logic together and it makes them work together.
Okay, so I have to put in the work. All these knowledge bombs were amazing, so I had to ask the question that was on my mind since I started talking with this amazing woman. What are we, as entrepreneurs, not asking ourselves?
Before we let Alda answer this question, here's Mark Fisher from Volume 19 explaining the self-determination theory for context.
So self-determination theory is one psychological framework that we've used at Mark Fisher Fitness. And it basically posits that humans have 3 core human needs. And there are all sorts of different frameworks. I've read a lot of other ones, but the one we tend to go back to is this one, which it's social science literature. Is it empirical? Is it not? I'm not sure, but as far as like evidence for social science stuff goes, it's pretty strong. And the 3 core human needs are autonomy. We want to feel like we have some control. We want to feel like we're not having to do things. We have some agency. Number 2, competency. We want to feel like we know what we're doing. We want to feel like we're progressing. And particularly, we fear looking stupid. And lastly, relatedness, with a very fancy academic term, which means for belonging. I want to be part of a community. I want the feeling of genuinely caring for someone else and a feeling that people care about me.
I think they should ask more. Am I maintaining a good connection and relationship with myself and the people I work with? People that are around me. I think that's a question we don't ask ourselves a lot. Like, how is my connection to my brain today? How is my relationship with my brain today? Like, how's my relationship with my intuition today? Just asking that. I think that's so much more powerful than we think. And it's like that 75-year-old Harvard study where Harvard followed people for 75 years. And then they said like it was the quality of the relationship that I had with other people. I believe that's a very, very true statement. So they followed people for 75 years and they asked them, I think it was every 5 years or every 10 years, that they asked them like the highlight of their lives and what made them happy. And then by the end of 75 years, the people said it was the quality of my relationships. So with their loved ones, with their friends, etc. It proves that we're a social species. It does. But I think it also asks the questions like, how is your relationship to yourself? Like, are you aware of yourself? Are you aware of what kind of thoughts put you in a mood? Are you aware of what kind of words put you in a certain mood? So just asking that question for an entrepreneur, like, okay, how's my relationship to my brain right now? What kind of thoughts are putting me in a mood? What kind of thoughts are like giving me confidence boosters? What kind of words are people saying to me that get me down? What kind of words are bringing me up? How can I teach those people to treat me with the right words so we can all work together? Because we're all on the same team. We are all on the same team. I love my competitors. I want to help them in any way I can, because if we're all working on just mental health, that's amazing.
There are definitely patterns that I've started to notice that I've never knew were there. And these are all part of my operating system. I've started to notice what words and what situations put me in a certain mood. I do think it helps me be a better husband, for sure. Better person, possibly. Better entrepreneur and leader on most days.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
I interviewed Alda because we first had this amazing conversation on an episode of the Bond Apathy podcast. You should go and check that out. On that podcast, I made her a promise of interviewing her on this one. She's so unique in different ways. She started her entrepreneurial journey at the age of 13. At 19, became the VP at Saga Film, the biggest production company in Iceland. She was the VP of Sales and Marketing at Ghost Lamp in 2016. She's the founder and CEO of Alda Incorporated. She specializes in virtual reality solutions for mental health. She's an amazing speaker, incredibly deep thinker, and an empath.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
This is a Must Amplify production. Special thanks to every guest expert that has appeared on the show. Editing, voiceovers, and sound design by Kaylee Bonnyman and Tiago Vega. Guest research and content by Claire Gould and Corinne Castles. Project managed by Kaylee Bonnyman. Produced and hosted by me, Ronsley Vaz. For more episodes and where to listen, go to mustamplify.com/POE.
Hey, it's Kaylee from Must Amplify. I'm the sound engineer for this volume of Psychology of Entrepreneurship. I'm part of the team that made this production come alive. I work as a part of a global team with our studios based in West End, Brisbane, Australia. If you would like a podcasting checklist, email me at kaylee@amplifyagency.media. That's KAILI@amplifyagency.media. We specialize in finding your voice and making sure it's heard by the right people. If you are considering whether a podcast is a good idea for your business, check out our other show on shouldistartapodcast.com.